Hi guys, it's John here from Geeks Wargaming again, and I've got the third now in a series of quick overviews of my army. So this time, it's the guys that you all love to hate. It is Tau Empire. So my Tau Empire army basically came about as a bit of a necessity. Um, you've seen my Black Templars army. You've seen my Imperial Guard army, so you know that I'm really all about the human faction. And the same is also pretty much true of the other guys, although Rich has got a nice Orc army and he's got some Chaos as well. But essentially, we're all about the Loyalist factions. And as a result, we realised playing each other on a regular basis, we were going to run out of excuses really quickly to play power armour on power armour and brother against brother. So having an extra Xenos army in the mix was something that was definitely going to be useful. And so of the armies that were available, I considered Tyranids. I really like Tyranids. But the problem I feel with those guys is I just find the idea of painting those guys a little bit daunting, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure it was really for me. And Tau was the other option. And I like Tau because they're a little bit different. They're quite distinctive. They're quite sleek. They're quite modern. And they look very different from the other factions within 40k. So I opted to go for Tau, and over the years that I've had them, I've actually grown to like them quite a lot, and maybe not for the reasons that you might immediately think of when it comes to Tau. I am by no means a power gamer. It's not really my bag. I like playing games that are fluffy and representative of the background stories of the different races, and I've tried to build up a Tau army that kind of reflects that. So when you look at my Tau army, there's a lot of fire warriors in there. There's some crisis suits in there because the way I read it is that those things are quite readily available to the Tau Empire. There's a couple of the tanks in there, but I wanted to keep down the Riptides, Storm Surges, all the kind of crazy stuff that you can do with Tau was really not on my agenda at all. So I'd like to think that I've built a list which is not overly cheesy and the kind of army that you'd like to come up against. One of the things I do really like about the Tau is that they are a little bit of a glass hammer as a race. They are awesome. It is very well documented how good they are at shooting. But a lot of their power really relies on tactical play to make sure that you've got the right units firing at the right targets in the right combinations. So things like the buffs that you get through marker lights, they're very situational. You've got to get your units in the right places. My army is not particularly heavy on marker lights as well, so you've got to be really strategic about where those things go. The formation rules where if you've got units all firing at the same target, they get buffs, that kind of thing. You know, you've got to get all your ducks in a row, get things in the right place, otherwise it just falls apart. And the other way that Tau really badly falls apart, and this has happened to me once when I was playing Robin, and it basically got me into close combat, and it's game over at that point because Tau suck at close combat. You know, you get units in close combat, you can get a dustpan and brush and take your Tau off because they are not going to stand up. Even the Riptide is going to get mullered in close combat. It's really painful situation to be in when you're in combat. So I quite like that about a Tau. I like this, you have to be clever, you have to stand off, make sure you don't get units into assault. I find it a very tactical army, although, you are welcome to disagree. And yeah, Tau are a powerful race. There's no two ways about that. But like I said before, I'd like to think that I've built a list which is fair, reasonable, and the sort of army that you would like to come up against. So let's go take a look at my army. So my Tau army has 3 HQ choices available to it. On the left hand side we've got a Cadra Fireblade, and he generally has a Markerlight drone with him for company. Then in the centre we've got a Tau Commander. I generally give him the Iridium Battle Suit to make him a bit more beefy, and he generally has 2 Markerlight drones with him as well. I usually give him the drone controller as well, so those drones can fire at his ballistic skill, and I also give him the ability to be able to fire at their own targets, and a quite nice tactic is for the drones to light up one target while the commander's dealing with another threat. And then on the right hand side we've got the Ethereal. Now it's a pretty rare day when you'll see the Ethereal in battle, though he does have some nice buffs available to him, so he can get squads around him to be able to run and perform normal actions and give them extra shots and those kind of things. But the reason I don't tend to run him is it's not a points thing. He's only about 50 points. He's pretty cheap, but you're basically giving Slay the Warlord away. Because he's so wafer thin, he is going to get beaten up, he will die, and you will give enemy victory points by running him. So that's kind of the reason why you don't see him on the field very often. And then moving on to troops, I've got 3 squads of Fire Warriors. We've got a red squad, a cream squad, and a blue squad. And each of those has a set of drones that go with it, although I very rarely use them because they're more expensive than a normal Fire Warrior and they don't really give you any extra buffs. I've got a Devilfish, which is a really nice transport actually. It's nice and reliable to get people across the board, and given how squishy these Fire Warriors can be, putting them in a metal box is definitely a viable tactic to keep them in the game just that little bit longer. Then I've got my Hammerhead. Now the Hammerhead is a really effective tank, particularly when you put Long Strike in him. Long Strike gives you all sorts of abilities like really good ballistic skill, preferred enemy Imperial Guard, and Tank Hunter. So it just makes the thing awesome, and if I remember correctly as well, it also gives him twin links, and one of the downsides of course with any gun where you've got a very powerful single shot weapon is you are going to fluff your dice rolls, and if you watch the way I play, then you'll know that this Hammerhead has repeatedly fluffed dice rolls, mostly because I don't tend to take Long Strike in there. Everything I've just said about him being awesome is true, but unfortunately he's a bit of a point sink, so I tend to save Long Strike for the bigger games and then rue the day that I didn't take him when I play little games and fluff dice rolls. So yeah, one day maybe I'll rewrite my list to be able to fit Long Strike in there. And then we've got my Piranha. Now I do like the Piranha. Essentially he only really exists in the army because you have to take something from the fast attack slot in order to access most of the formations. But I call it the Suicide Piranha because I fitted it out with a Fusion Blaster, which is effectively a melt gun, and his tactic is basically zoom up the board, get in the rear of the nearest available heavy vehicle and get shot off, and then if it survives any turns after that, it's a bonus. So he's just a bit of a suicide unit, but it tends to do pretty well actually, and it's certainly a little bit of a distraction early on in the game to see that thing zipping up the board towards you, even though it's only really wafer thin. And then moving on to the meat of my army, we've got 2 crisis squads. The first, I've had a lot of comments on this already. This really is a squad without an identity. If you look at the loadouts there, we've got missile pods on all of them. Then we've got 1 burst cannon, we've got a fusion blaster, we've got a plasma rifle. What's this squad going after? You know, is it horde? Is it heavy vehicles? Or is it well-armed troops? And the reason the squad is like this is basically I bought these things cheap and I've never got around to changing them, and I don't really know what I'd change them for, to be honest with you. So yeah, any suggestions that you've got on loadouts for these things would be definitely appreciated. You certainly can't say the same thing about my other squad. These guys are very focused on going after Terminators and the equivalent, or anything that's heavily armoured troops. They're loaded up to the gunnels with plasma rifles, and they're chucking down a lot of dice, and they're not going to get hot because they're Tau, and they are vicious. You know, you watch the bat reps, you'll see these guys causing a lot of aggro. The commander is also given a fusion blaster as well, just in case he comes across any heavily armoured vehicles that he needs to deal with, but chucking down those plasma is enough on its own in a lot of cases to really ruin people's days, and I really do like this squad. They're very focused on what they do. Each of those squads has available to them a shield drone and a MacLeod drone as well, but I don't tend to use them both. And then we've got the optimized stealth cadre. This is a formation which is basically a ghost keel and then 2 squads of stealth units. You'll see these are the older XV15 patterns. And I really like these guys. I particularly like Hall of Mirrors, which basically allows you to strike the rear armour of a vehicle even if you're actually facing the front armour face, which makes those burst cannons effective against things like rhinos and razorbacks. and even potentially slightly bigger units. The Ghost Kill itself is loaded out with a Fusion Blaster, and I've done a very small conversion on that one where you can see that the weapon is attached to his arm rather than over his shoulder, and I've put the Electro Warfare Suite off on his shoulder instead. I just think that makes a bit more sense. So very small conversion. The paint scheme on these guys is really to reflect their stealthy nature. Somewhat inspired by sort of Tron and that kind of thing. I like to imagine the force field protecting these units and allowing them to blend into the background. And yeah, certainly that works tactically as well. You know, the ability to have some ridiculous cover saves and potentially stand out in the open is an ongoing frustration to people that play these guys, and it's pretty awesome. These guys, the stealth squads tend to have MacLeod drones with them, but I do have a shield drone available for each unit as well. But I tend to find that with a 3-up armor save, they're doing alright on their own, and they don't really need the shield drone there as well. So the MacLeod drone tend to have a tactic of cascading, so one squad buffs the other squad buffs the Ghost Kill. That tends to be the way these things work. In terms of deployment, they tend to deep strike in, which is a bit of a double-edged sword, but if it all works off nicely and they all come into the right place and don't scatter, that is a pretty effective combination. The other formation that I have is the heavy support cadre, which is a Riptide and 2 broadside squads. Squads of 1 each. So the broadsides tend to sit at the back of the battlefield, and if they all fire at the same target, they're getting the tank hunter, which somewhat makes up for the fact that the rail rifle has been nerfed in a recent codex change. So it's only strength 8, but then at least you've got the option with tank hunter to re-roll that if it doesn't work out for you. The Riptide itself, I tend to give him the early warning override and the velocity tracker, so that gives him the ability to do intercept, and it gives him the ability to do skyfire as well. And I find that he is enough of a deterrent for flyers in the main. You'll notice there's no other anti-air in this army at all, but it seems to be working out quite well at the moment. I mean, given that we don't have a lot of flyers in the local meta, it does make a difference as well, I guess, but I don't have any flyers. I have been thinking about buying the Barracuda, by the way, so if anyone out there has a Barracuda, let me know what you think about that. I am very tempted to buy one. I love the model. I'm interested in doing that, but I've not really found a need to plug an anti-air gap at the moment. I particularly like overcharging a Riptide. It does mean chucking down 12 dice, giving it rending. It's a pretty nasty combo, but the weak spot, as it is with all of the Tau, is getting that Riptide in close combat means it is likely to get beaten up pretty badly, if not chased down, charged down, killed. So yeah, keeping him out of combat is definitely something to watch. You do like using the assault moves to hop out of the way and keeping him as safe as I possibly can. The broadside squads, I've given them both a set of drones each. One has a shield drone, and then the other 3 slots are filled with missile drones. Don't really use them as much as I should. I tend to keep these guys, as I said, at the back of the battlefield. They're not getting up close and personal, but the missile pods, for one, they're a deterrent if people come too close, and if somebody does come up close, then it's chucking down extra dice, albeit at a lower ballistic skill, but it does tend to make people think twice about attacking those units. I tend to use the overwatching skills as well, so that the broadsides are never overly exposed on their own, and there are other Tau units out there that can fire an overwatch as well to bolster these guys up if they do come under any kind of attack. And yeah, so there you go, guys. That's a quick overview of the army. The one other thing that I do have that's still kicking around in a box at the moment is Kroot. I don't know what to do with them. Obviously, I need to build them and paint them at some point, but I don't necessarily feel there's a gap for them in the army. From what I've read on the stat lines, they're not assault units. They're not going to be close combat monsters, but they might be quite an effective meat shield. So, again, guys, if you've got any experience of using Kroot, if you've got any advice, let me know. Try and motivate me to build them. But yeah, other than that then, guys, that's a final look over the army there. I hope you enjoyed watching that. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel so you can see these guys coming up in combat again soon. And in the interim, guys, thanks very much for watching. See you again soon.